Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of turboing a chainsaw. Have made some progress. So it's mounted and it's solid, and I'm making headway. So I'll bring you in here a little closer here in just a second. But the top cover actually does fit nice, so we'll still have a good amount of cooling across the cylinder there. So I took this whole turbo apart, like everything. Took the bearings out of the center section. I just kind of wanted to have a look at how this thing, works. This is of course a journal bearing turbo, but we don't have a way to feed pressurized oil to the center section here. So I've actually taken some measurements of the shaft and the center section bore where the journal bearing rides inside of the center section. And I believe that I can modify this turbo to make it ball bearing fairly easily. I ordered a couple hybrid ceramic bearings that I think all I really will have to do is, what holds these journal bearings in this turbo are just a couple snap rings. And the new bearings will just be pressed into the center section, and I'll make a video of when they get here and when I do that. We have a nice reference on the bottom side of the turbo here to mount it in the mill and bore the center out. There's plenty of meat in there, and I think we can just make this thing ball bearing, and I just think it'll last that much longer. This thing does spin better than when I got it. I actually ended up taking one of the sealing rings out. Whenever this turbo was assembled, one of the sealing rings got caught on the lip, and it actually bent it back, and this turbo was quite a bit harder to spin. But even then, journal bearing without pressurized oil, even with this filled up with oil, it just is not going to function like I think it should. So we're going ball bearing, and that'll eliminate, I haven't quite decided if I'm going to open the bearings up and run them open and then just put some oil in the center section. Or I'll just leave them sealed with the Sin oil that comes with them. I ordered them from Acer Racing, and they're supposed to be pretty good bearings. ABEX 7 ceramic, and good for high speed. I think it'll just make that turbo last that much longer in this application. If it burns up, it is what it is. We'll get another one or figure something else out. But so that's the oiling addressed, is we're going to go ball bearing. So this, I actually, from where I was originally going to mount it, I did change it a little bit because this compressor housing was clocked forward, and I just thought it was going to look goofy running a charge pipe out and over. So I was able to sneak, I think I can sneak the pipe right down here on the outside of the recoil. And I am going to use a 660 style handle, but I've got one that's not a wrap coming, just a cheap one, because I actually have to cut the bottom part of this handle off to make this work. And I think it'll look better if we just do it that way. And then how we're going to address the inlet to the carb, because to start off, I am going to try to blow through this factory carb. I did run this with the turbo on here, no charge pipe, and of course this is quite a restriction now because this isn't feeding any air to it. But the salt acts like it's super rich. And I think that's just because there's quite a restriction here, and it can't get that out because there's just nothing being fed in there. But I think being rich is going to be good because I just have a feeling that we're going to have a lack of fuel when we get to the point of making this charge pipe to come around and feed it. I've got I think it's 1.25" OD aluminum, couple U-bends coming, and I'm gonna make a nice charge pipe to go around there. And so we're kind of waiting on parts right now. But another thing I was gonna say, you know, here, one of my theories, and of course this is just, you know, my brain trying to think of every possible scenario that we might run into, is of course there is a possibility that we're going to have to put a reed on this thing, so it doesn't just blow fuel back. Of course, again, you would think it's blowing in, you know, it's going to shove it in there, but I'm kind of wondering if free porting the piston will be something that we might try as well, because that way this turbo, when this thing is singing, you know, it'll have some release of all that pressure until it closes that port off completely, and then it'll push it up through the bottom transfers. But again, I'm not to that point. I'm just trying to think of every scenario that we might run into. Surprisingly, this thing is super balanced left and right. I mean, for having a turbo mounted on there, it's just about right in the middle. Of course, it's not very light, but who gives a shit? And you know, the weight will just make it to where when we do get this thing figured out, it'll just eat. So right now I am working on the exhaust, because I mean, if you got a turbo on a chainsaw, you got to make a badass exhaust. So I started off with just a piece of 1/8" stainless. Just traced out the shape of the exhaust housing with the steel gasket that came with it, and I left as much meat around here as possible, so when I weld it, it won't warp as bad, because this shit warps like crazy. But that's what I'm gonna work on right now, is get this exhaust made. So then once I get this welded out, I can just trim the shape of this out on the bandsaw and then clean it up with some carbide or something. But yeah, I'm gonna weld this out real quick, and I'll bring you in here real quick. I'll show you kind of how we got this thing mounted in here. So it's a super short little header there. And then I just made a simple mount down there that bolts to where the muffler bolts to, and then took a couple pieces, I believe it's 5/16 1/4" stainless rod, and just ran it up there to hold the weight of this thing. So that turned out good. And so so far I'm happy with kind of where we're at. I'll kind of show you the exhaust. I'll get it welded up, or at least tacked together here real quick, so you guys can see what it's gonna be like. So, you know, there's several options of, you know, carburetors that we can use. I do have this, I mean, this thing's huge for this application, but we could always mount a carb like this and just do a draw through. So that's also an option. But how we're going to run the charge into the carburetor for now is I am going to make a velocity stack. And I've talked about, I don't know what the seal, how much this thing is going to hold between this carburetor and the intake boot for pressure. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a velocity stack, and I've got some thin rubber, and I'm going to make a rubber gasket that goes in between the velocity stack and the carburetor. We're going to bolt that on, and then the outside of the velocity stack, there's going to be a silicone boot clamped to that. And then that is actually going to either neck down to 1.25 from there, or, which is, surely I can find a silicone boot that just necks down to 1.25, or I'll just neck it down in the aluminum to 1.25 and just run the same size boot that the velocity stack is. So yeah, I'm really itching to get this thing going. So we got the aluminum pipe coming for that. So I'd like to get this exhaust knocked out. So that's what I'm going to work on right now. So here in this clip, I'm just trying to get this thing fit together and weld it in a way that it doesn't warp that bottom plate so bad. I'm using 308 LSI filler rod, and the bottom plate for the actual mounting to the turbo itself is 1/8 inch 304 stainless, and the pipe is, I believe, 1 3/4 or 2 inch 065 stainless pipe. So I'm just trying to weld it with as close of an arc as possible to the puddle so it doesn't just heat it up so bad, because that stuff does warp pretty bad. But we're getting it welded together here and just kind of making sure everything's lining up. And right here where I'm welding underneath the front where it's tight is kind of a tricky spot, but you just got to turn your gas up and get your tungsten stuck out so you can get it fit underneath there. And here we're just fitting the top teardrop. So in this clip, we are just finishing up welding out the teardrop. Got it out of the clamp to where I could get around there a little bit easier. After this, I take it over to the bandsaw off camera, and I cut out the shape of the housing of the turbo and get it cleaned up. This all up because I was trying to get as much weight off of this thing as possible, but I'll show you an up close here. You can hear my loud son on the inside of the house. But yeah, this is the final outcome, must say. turned out pretty damn slick. I have not even held it up there to see if it's going to clear. But I wanted to see if it's going to fit. So, oh yeah. It's money. That's pretty slick. That's freaking badass. So the reason it has to be this shape is because that's the wastegate. I don't think this wastegate's even gonna come on. But if it did, if we end up having to move this over to a big ass saw and we really turn it up and get this thing cooking, we're probably gonna want the wastegate operational. So honestly, I don't have very many short M8 bolts. I got these fancy bolts from another project years ago. We might have to. Man, that thing turned out freaking killer. Still cannot believe that we're doing this, but so yeah, we're just going to get the charge pipe made. Have to make a little flange, kind of like I did for this top. For the oil, this is actually the oil drain. I've got it facing up because I put some oil in there and I can see down in I can actually see the shaft of the turbo through the drain. Yeah, ball bearing conversion, I am gonna do that, but I think we'll get the charge pipe made next, get this all connected and see what happens. So just want to say thank you to all the subscribers, all the people that are watching the videos. It's awesome. I really appreciate it. So yeah, we're going to try to make, usually if I take on a task, I try to do the best that I possibly can. So, and this is no different. So, Indiana Doug had mentioned that if this size of saw doesn't work out, that maybe we need to put it on a 3120 Husqvarna, and I mean, I'm not opposed. So that may be an option. So we'll see how this one goes. If this size of saw will not spin this up hard enough, we're gonna go bigger and just to a totally different platform entirely. So, but yeah, again, appreciate you guys watching. Like, subscribe, share, all of that is very much appreciated. So I got my email on there now. If you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot.